My neighbor peered through my driver's side window, her acrylic nails tapping against the glass like a metronome counting down to a meltdown. She told me I was violating code. She told me she was calling the military police to have me forcibly removed from my own property. I just smiled, turned the engine off, and waited. Because the absolute best part of her threat? The guy she was calling down to arrest me was me. The first thing you notice about Pelican Bay isn't the houses, it's the silence. It's a heavy, suffocating kind of quiet. The kind that only exists in neighborhoods where every blade of grass is mandated to be precisely 2.5 inches tall. You don't hear children playing in the streets. You don't hear dogs barking. You hear the rhythmic, mechanical tss, tss, tss of sprinkler systems engaging at exactly 6 in the morning, and the low hum of luxury golf carts patrolling the cul-de-sacs. I bought the house on a Tuesday. By Thursday, I already regretted it. After 22 years of military service, most of it spent in places where the concept of a lawn was a sick joke, and sleep was something you did in 10-minute increments against a concrete wall. I thought I wanted peace. I thought I wanted a nice, normal, suburban house off-post just outside the perimeter of Fort Bradley. I had recently transitioned out of active duty and into a senior civilian role. I was the new director of base security. Provost Marshal, head of the military police, chief pain in the ass for anyone breaking the law on federal property. It was a massive job with a lot of moving parts, and I wanted my home to be a sanctuary. Instead, I moved into a homeowners association, run by a shadow government of bored spouses. The moving truck pulled into my driveway at noon. The heat was already radiating off the asphalt in shimmering waves. My back ached, a sharp reminder of a hard landing in Kandahar a decade ago. I was wearing an old, sweat-stained gray t-shirt, faded gym shorts, and a pair of boots that had seen better days. I looked like a guy who turned wrenches for a living, not the man carrying the highest security clearance in a 50-mile radius. I liked it that way. In my experience, the moment you put on a suit or wear your rank on your chest, people stop treating you like a human being and start treating you like a vending machine for their own agendas. I was carrying a box of kitchen supplies up the driveway when she made her first approach. I didn't hear her coming. She didn't walk. She glided, propelled by a sense of absolute, unshakable entitlement. "Excuse me." The voice was nasal, sharp, and carried the specific tone of someone who was used to speaking to customer service representatives. I set the heavy box down on the tailgate of my truck and turned around. She was in her late 40s, wearing a pristine tennis outfit, despite the fact that she clearly hadn't broken a sweat in years. Her blonde hair was pulled back into a tight, severe visor. She held a clipboard clamped against her chest like a riot shield. "Can I help you?" I asked. I wiped a streak of sweat from my forehead with the back of my wrist. "I'm Brenda Wallace," she said. She didn't offer a hand to shake. She just stared at my boots, then up to my sweat-stained shirt, her nose wrinkling just a fraction of an inch. "I'm the president of the Pelican Bay Homeowners Association and the block captain." "Tom Becker," I said. "Just moved in." "I can see that," Brenda said, her eyes shifting to the massive yellow moving truck taking up my driveway. "We have a strict 48-hour policy for commercial vehicles in the neighborhood. They are an eyesore. I expect it to be gone by Saturday." I stared at her. I had been on the property for less than 20 minutes. The engine of the moving truck was literally still ticking as it cooled down. "It's a rental," I said evenly. "I'll have it back to the depot by tomorrow afternoon. Just need to get the heavy furniture out." "See that you do," she said. She clicked a pen and made a sharp check mark on her clipboard. It was a purely theatrical gesture. She didn't have anything written on the paper. I could see through the back of it. It was blank. "Furthermore, the wheels of your truck are currently resting on the edge of the pedestrian easement." I looked down. The rear passenger tire of my pickup truck, not the moving van but my personal F-150, was touching the edge of the concrete sidewalk that intersected my driveway. It wasn't blocking the sidewalk. A family of 4 could have walked past arm in arm without breaking stride. The rubber was merely grazing the concrete lip. "I'll pull it forward an inch," I said. I kept my voice flat, neutral. It's a de-escalation tactic. You don't give them emotion to feed on. Code Section 4, Paragraph 2, clearly states that driveways must remain completely unobstructed. to allow for safe passage of neighborhood foot traffic. Brenda recited, her chin tilting up. This is a premier community, Mr. Becker. Many of us are military families. My husband is a major. We expect discipline. We expect order. We do not tolerate people treating this neighborhood like a trailer park. I felt a familiar, cold weight settle in my chest. I knew this type. I had spent 2 decades leading men and women in high-stakes environments. Real leaders are quiet. They listen. They absorb pressure. But then there is the other type, the people who cling to proximity to power because they have none of their own. She was weaponizing her husband's rank, a major, mid-level officer, respectable, but in the grand scheme of a base with 40,000 personnel, just another cog in the machine. I'll move the truck, Brenda, I said, picking my box back up. Have a good afternoon. I turned my back on her and walked into the house. I could feel her eyes burning a hole between my shoulder blades. I didn't need to look back to know I had just made an enemy. I hadn't groveled. I hadn't looked impressed by her husband's rank. I had dismissed her to a suburban tyrant. Indifference is an act of war. The next 3 weeks were an education in petty insurgency. In a combat zone, the enemy shoots at you. It's honest. You know where you stand. In Pelican Bay, the enemy leaves passive-aggressive notes taped to your garbage can. My job on base was a pressure cooker. I was restructuring the entire physical security protocol for Fort Bradley. I was dealing with federal budgets, coordinating with the FBI on counterterrorism intel, and managing a police force of over 300 sworn personnel. I left my house at 5 in the morning and rarely got home before 7 at night. When I was home, I wanted to sit on my back patio, drink a cheap beer, and watch the sun go down. Brenda Wallace had other plans. It started small. A pink slip of paper wedged into my front door on a Tuesday. Violation. Trash receptacle, visible from the street outside of designated collection hours. I had left for work at 5:02 a.m. and pulled the bin to the curb. The trash truck came at 10:02 a.m. I pulled the bin back into my garage when I got home at 7:02 p.m. According to Brenda, bins had to be hidden by 5:01 p.m. I threw the slip in the trash. 2 days later, another slip. Violation. Grass exceeds acceptable length. I measured my grass. It was exactly 2 3/4 inches long. The bylaws stated 2.5. She had actually walked onto my lawn with a ruler. I didn't get angry. Anger is a waste of glucose. Instead, I found it morbidly fascinating. It takes a profound lack of purpose in one's life to obsess over a 1/4 inch of Bermuda grass. I hired a local landscaping kid to cut it twice a week just to remove the variable. But Brenda wasn't looking for compliance. She was looking for submission. She wanted me to acknowledge her authority. Because I drove a standard domestic pickup, wore plain clothes, and kept to myself, she had categorized me. In her hierarchy, I was a nobody, a civilian contractor maybe, or a retired enlisted man scraping by. She was the wife of a major. She was royalty. I was a peasant muddying her kingdom. The breaking point arrived on a Thursday evening in late October. I have a hobby. It's the only thing that keeps my blood pressure in check. I restore old engines. A buddy of mine, a master sergeant who was transferring to Germany, had a 1978 Ford Bronco that barely ran. He sold it to me for a song. I managed to limp it home, trailing a faint cloud of blue smoke, and parked it in my driveway. I had a 2-car garage, but it was currently filled with unpacked boxes and a workbench I was building, so the Bronco sat on the driveway, right behind my daily driver, the F-150. Both vehicles were fully within my property lines. Neither blocked the sidewalk. Neither touched the street. They were parked back to back. I was blocking my own truck with my own Bronco. I was under the hood of the Bronco at around 6 that evening, a rag slung over my shoulder, grease up to my elbows. The sun was dipping below the roof lines, casting long, cool shadows across the concrete. I had a wrench in one hand and a cup of lukewarm coffee in the other. It was the most relaxed I had felt in a month. Then I heard the brisk, purposeful squeak of rubber-soled tennis shoes marching up my driveway. I pulled my head out from under the hood and wiped my hands on the rag. Brenda was standing at the end of my driveway, accompanied by a man I assumed was Major Gary Wallace. Gary looked tired. He had the slightly deflated posture of a man who spends his entire workday answering to colonels and generals, only to come home and answer to Brenda. He was wearing khakis and a polo shirt tucked in so tight it looked painful. "Mr. Becker," Brenda barked. She was holding a bright yellow piece of paper this time, an escalation from the pink slips. "This is completely unacceptable." "Evening, Brenda," I said, leaning against the fender of the Bronco. I nodded to the man. "Gary, I presume?" Gary offered a weak smile and started to raise a hand in greeting, but Brenda stepped in front of him, physically blocking his attempt at diplomacy. "Do not try to buddy up to my husband," she snapped. "We are not your friends. We are the enforcers of the covenants of this community, and you are in direct, flagrant violation." "Which covenant?" I asked, taking a slow sip of my coffee. "You are operating a salvage yard on residential property," she said, gesturing wildly at the Bronco. "This vehicle is unregistered, unsightly, and leaking fluids onto the driveway. Furthermore, you have created a barricade. You are blocking your own driveway." I looked at the Bronco. It wasn't pretty. The paint was faded, and there was rust on the quarter panels, but it was entirely intact. "It's not a salvage yard, Brenda. It's a classic vehicle. I'm restoring it," I said. "It's registered in the state. The plates are right there on the bumper. And yes, it is parked behind my truck. It's my driveway. I can block myself in if I want to." "Not in Pelican Bay you can't," she sneered. "Our bylaws clearly state that all vehicles must be parked in a manner that allows immediate ingress and egress. By blocking your truck, you are creating a fire hazard. What if emergency services need to access your garage?" The logic was so deeply flawed, it almost gave me a headache. If the fire department needs to get to my garage, Brenda, they aren't going to politely ask me to move my cars. They're going to drive their 40-ton fire engine straight over my lawn and put an axe through my front door. Gary coughed into his hand. It sounded like he was trying to disguise a laugh. Brenda shot him a look that could have stripped paint off a battleship. Gary immediately looked down at his loafers. "You think this is a joke?" Brenda said, turning her fury back on me. Her face was flushing, red splotches blooming on her neck. "You think the rules don't apply to you because you're some grease monkey who managed to secure a mortgage you probably can't afford. My husband is the deputy director of logistics for Fort Bradley. Do you know what that means?" "It means he counts things," I said. It was a low blow, but I was tired. Logistics is the backbone of the military, but throwing the title around like it's a lethal weapon in a driveway dispute is pathetic. Gary flinched. Brenda gasped. "How dare you?" she hissed. "Gary is a field-grade officer. You will show him the respect his rank demands." "Brenda, he's wearing a golf shirt and standing in my driveway complaining about my parking," I said, my voice dropping an octave, losing the polite, neighborly cadence. "I don't care if he's a 5-star general. You're on my property. My cars are legal. My grass is cut. My trash is hidden. Go home." "I am issuing a fine," she yelled, stepping forward, waving the yellow paper. $50 a day until this junker is towed. And if you refuse to pay, we will put a lien on this house. We will take it from you." I looked at her. I didn't see a neighbor. I saw someone deeply, profoundly terrified of being irrelevant. "You aren't putting a lien on anything," I said. "Now please leave." "Move the vehicle by tomorrow morning," she commanded, pointing a trembling, manicured finger at my chest. "Or I'm calling base security. This is a military-affiliated community, Becker. The Provost Marshal's office handles civil disputes here. You think you're tough? Let's see how tough you are when the military police drag you out of here in handcuffs." I froze. The rag in my hand suddenly felt very heavy. Did she just threaten to call my own employees on me? I looked at Gary. He was staring at the ground, desperately wishing to be anywhere else on earth. He clearly hadn't looked into who I was. Why would he? He was in logistics. I was in security. Fort Bradley had thousands of civilians and contractors. "You're going to call the military police," I repeated slowly. I wanted to make sure I heard her correctly. "I have the direct line to the dispatcher," she said, a smug, triumphant smile spreading across her face. She thought my hesitation was fear. "Gary plays golf with the base commander. They have a zero-tolerance policy for insubordination off-post. I will have you cited, fined, and your vehicles impounded." A slow, deliberate smile broke across my face. I couldn't help it. The sheer, cosmic comedy of the situation was too rich. "Brenda," I said softly, "I think that is a fantastic idea. Call them." She hesitated, just for a fraction of a second. Call bluffs are tricky. When someone immediately agrees to your threat, the human brain instinctually pauses. "Don't test me," she warned, pulling a sleek smartphone from her pocket. "I'm not testing you," I said. I pulled my cell phone from my own pocket and checked the time. 18:45. The evening shift had just come on duty. In fact, if you want, I can give you the direct desk number for the shift supervisor. Save you the trouble of going through the central dispatch operator. I know the number, she spat. She unlocked her phone and began dialing with furious jabs of her thumb. Gary, tell him. Gary looked up, sweating profusely, despite the cooling evening air. Well, you know, they do take neighborhood disturbances seriously, Mr. Barker. Maybe it's best we just all calm down and— Shut up, Gary, Brenda snapped. She pressed the phone to her ear. Yes, dispatch, this is Brenda Wallace, president of the Pelican Bay HOA. I need a patrol unit dispatched to 4142 Oakleaf Drive immediately. I have a hostile resident refusing to comply with neighborhood code, creating a fire hazard, and acting in a threatening manner toward a military officer. She paused, listening. Her eyes stayed locked on mine. No, there are no weapons, but he is belligerent. Yes, my husband is Major Wallace. We need an officer here now to enforce a tow order. She lowered the phone and hit end call. She crossed her arms over her chest, tapping her foot against the concrete. They're sending a unit, she said, her voice dripping with venom. They said they'll be here in 10 minutes. I hope you have a good lawyer, Mr. Becker. I think I'll be fine, I said. I turned around, walked to the bed of my truck, and pulled down the tailgate. The hinges let out a loud metallic groan. I hopped up and sat on the edge of the tailgate, letting my legs dangle. I picked up my coffee cup, took a sip, and looked at them. What are you doing? Brenda demanded. Waiting, I said. You called the cops. I'm waiting for the cops. Do you guys want a water or something? It's going to be a few minutes. I don't want anything from you except your immediate departure from this neighborhood, she snarled. Well, you're not getting that, so water is the only offer on the table. We waited. The silence returned to the neighborhood, broken only by the ambient noise of a distant lawnmower. The standoff was absurd. A middle-aged man covered in motor oil sitting on a tailgate, while a woman in pristine tennis whites stood at the end of the driveway, like a sentinel guarding the gates of heaven. Gary shifted his weight from left to right, looking everywhere except at me. You know, I said, breaking the silence after 5 minutes. The military police don't enforce HOA bylaws. It's not in their jurisdiction. They handle criminal code, federal offenses, and base security. They have concurrent jurisdiction in this subdivision. Brenda countered immediately, reciting the phrase as if she had memorized it from a brochure. It's an annex property. They absolutely have the authority to maintain good order and discipline. Good order and discipline, I echoed, nodding slowly. That's a military term, Brenda. It applies to soldiers. I'm a civilian in my own driveway, but I suppose we'll let the responding officers sort that out. They will side with the major, she said with absolute certainty. That's how things work in the real world. The real world, I repeated. I looked around the manicured lawns, the fake stone facades of the houses, the complete absence of any actual dirt or grit. Right. 7 minutes later, the heavy, unmistakable sound of a police interceptor engine broke the quiet of the street. A white SUV with bold blue lettering, Fort Bradley Military Police, turned the corner onto Oakleaf Drive. The light bar on the roof wasn't flashing, but the vehicle moved with purpose. It rolled to a stop right at the curb in front of my house. Brenda immediately stood taller. She smoothed her tennis skirt, pushed her shoulders back, and pasted a look of deeply concerned, victimized citizenship onto her face. Gary stood rigid, suddenly remembering he was an officer. The driver's side door of the SUV popped open. A young sergeant stepped out. He was tall, built like a linebacker, wearing a crisp tactical uniform, heavy-duty belt loaded with gear, and a flat-brimmed campaign hat. His name tape read, Simmons. I knew him. Good kid. Sharp instincts. Handled a nasty domestic dispute in the barracks 2 weeks ago with absolute professionalism. He closed his door and walked toward the driveway, his hand resting casually on his belt. Not on his weapon, but near it. Standard approach posture. Evening, folks, Sergeant Simmons said. His voice was deep, authoritative, but calm. Dispatch got a call about a disturbance and a hostile individual. Yes, officer, Brenda said, stepping forward quickly, placing herself between Simmons and me. She pointed back at me, where I was still sitting on my tailgate. That man right there. He is violating community codes, blocking emergency access. And when my husband, Major Wallace, asked him to comply, he became verbally abusive and threatening. Simmons looked at Gary. You're Major Wallace, sir? Yes, Gary said, clearing his throat. I am. And you felt threatened by this individual, sir? Simmons asked. Gary hesitated. He knew the difference between being annoyed and being threatened. Lying to an MP was a terrible idea, especially for an officer. Well, he was uncooperative and belligerent. He practically lunged at us, Brenda interrupted. Simmons held up a gloved hand, gently but firmly silencing her. Ma'am, I need to speak to the major, please. He turned back to Gary. Sir, did he threaten you with violence? No, Gary admitted quietly. No violence. Okay, Simmons said, his posture relaxing slightly. He pulled a small notebook from his chest pocket. Let me get the other party's side of the story. Simmons stepped around Brenda and walked up the driveway. The sun was almost entirely gone now, the driveway illuminated by the amber glow of the streetlights. Simmons was looking down at his notebook, clicking his pen. Sir, I'm going to need to see some identification, and I need you to explain to me. Simmons stopped walking. He was about 10 feet away from me. The streetlight hit my face. I hadn't moved. I just sat on the tailgate holding my coffee cup, looking at him. Simmons blinked. His mouth opened slightly. He looked at my grease-stained shirt. He looked at the rusted Bronco. He looked back at my face. The gears in his head were spinning, violently grinding as he tried to process what he was seeing. The man sitting on the truck was the man whose signature was on the bottom of his paycheck. The man who had personally pinned his sergeant's stripes on him 3 months ago in the precinct briefing room, the director of base security. Good evening, Sergeant Simmons, I said, my voice quiet, carrying easily in the silent neighborhood. Simmons snapped to attention so fast I thought he might pull a muscle. His heels clicked together on the concrete. His spine went rigid. His hand flew up in a knife-edge salute. Director Becker, sir, Simmons barked, his voice suddenly echoing off the houses. I didn't realize. I apologize, sir. Dispatch didn't give a name for the subject. I didn't return the salute immediately. I let the silence stretch out for 3 long seconds. I looked past Simmons, down to the end of the driveway. Brenda's mouth was open. The smug, triumphant sneer had vanished, replaced by a look of sheer, unadulterated shock. The color drained from her face, leaving her looking pale and suddenly very old. Gary Wallace, to his credit, understood exactly what had just happened. A civilian being saluted by an MP. The title, Director. Gary wasn't in my chain of command, but he knew the base hierarchy. He knew who the provost marshal was. He knew who ran security. Gary looked like he wanted the concrete driveway to open up and swallow him whole. I took a final sip of my coffee, set the cup down on the tailgate, and slowly hopped off the truck. I wiped the grease off my hands with the rag one last time, tossed it into the bed, and walked towards Simmons. At ease, Sergeant, I said. Simmons dropped his salute and assumed the parade rest position, his hands clasped behind his back, feet shoulder-width apart. He was staring straight ahead, strictly by the book. It's okay, Simmons, I said, keeping my voice conversational. You're responding to a call, you're doing your job. Now let's address the complaint. I turned slowly to face Brenda and Gary. The streetlights buzzed softly above us. So, I said, my voice dropping back to that flat, emotionless tone I'd used on the day I moved in, let's talk about good order and discipline. Gary Wallace swallowed hard. The sound was audible in the quiet evening air, a dry, clicking gulp of pure panic. He took a half step forward, his hands raised in a gesture of surrender. The golf shirt that had looked so crisp 10 minutes ago now seemed to hang off him, damp with sudden, cold sweat. He didn't look at his wife. He looked straight at me, his eyes wide with the specific, hollow terror of a career officer watching 20 years of service flash before his eyes over a neighborhood parking dispute. Director Becker, Gary said. His voice cracked. He cleared his throat and tried again. Sir, I had no idea you had moved into the subdivision. Clearly, I said. I didn't move. I stayed right where I was, my boots planted on the concrete. Sergeant Simmons remained at parade rest to my left, an imposing wall of tactical navy blue, waiting for my cue. Brenda looked back and forth between her husband and me. The cognitive dissonance was breaking her brain in real time. In her constructed reality, she was the apex predator of Oakleaf Drive. I was the prey. The military police were supposed to be her teeth. Now her teeth were saluting the prey. Gary, what is going on? She demanded, her voice losing its sharp, commanding edge, dipping into a frantic, reedy pitch. Who is he? Tell this officer to issue the citation. Gary finally turned to her. For the first time since I had met him, he didn't look tired. He looked furious. The kind of suppressed, terrified fury a man feels when someone else is holding a match over his gasoline-soaked life. "Brenda, be quiet," Gary hissed. It wasn't a request, it was an order, ripped straight from the parade ground. She flinched, as if he had slapped her. "Excuse me?" I said, "Be quiet," Gary repeated, his jaw tight. He turned back to me. "Director, I apologize, profusely. My wife overstepped. This is a misunderstanding, a complete miscommunication." "It didn't sound like a miscommunication on the dispatch radio, Gary," I said softly. I took a step toward them, just one step, but the shift in proximity made Gary stiffen. It sounded like a report of a hostile, belligerent individual creating a threat to a military officer. It sounded like you requested an emergency response from federal law enforcement to resolve a civil HOA dispute. I turned my head slightly toward the young MP. "Sergeant Simmons, what is the penalty for filing a false report to the Provost Marshal's office, wasting federal resources, and utilizing emergency dispatch for non-emergency personal harassment?" Simmons didn't miss a beat. "Under the UCMJ and federal base regulations, sir, it can result in a severe fine, revocation of base housing privileges, and for the sponsor, an official letter of reprimand in their permanent file." A letter of reprimand for a major trying to make lieutenant colonel. A letter of reprimand was a career death sentence. It meant you retired at your current rank. It meant the end of the line. Gary knew this. The blood vanished completely from his face, leaving him a sickly, chalky white. "Sir, please," Gary pleaded, his voice dropping to a whisper. "I have 22 years in. My package goes before the promotion board in 6 months. I was not threatened. I did not ask for military police intervention. I am telling you, on my honor as an officer, I was dragged into this." I studied him. I saw a man who had survived deployments, staff meetings, and the grueling gauntlet of military politics, only to be brought to his knees by his wife's obsession with neighborhood superiority. I didn't feel triumph. I just felt a heavy, profound exhaustion. Brenda finally found her voice. She had processed the title, Director. You run base security?" she stammered. Her clipboard was trembling against her chest. "But you drive that awful truck. You look like someone who doesn't need to wear a suit to prove who he is." I finished for her. I looked her dead in the eyes. The cruelty of the moment was necessary. She needed to understand the exact dimensions of the wall she had just driven her car into. "Brenda, you have spent the last month harassing me over grass clippings, trash cans, and the wheels of my truck touching the sidewalk. I ignored it because you are completely, utterly irrelevant to my life." She opened her mouth, but nothing came out. "But tonight you crossed a line," I continued, keeping my tone perfectly level. "You tried to weaponize my own police force against me. You tried to use your husband's rank to intimidate a man you thought was beneath you. That tells me exactly who you are." I turned back to the MP. "Sergeant Simmons." "Yes, sir." "Is there a threat to public safety here?" "No, sir." "Is there a crime in progress?" "Negative, sir." "Then clear the call. Code 4, return to your patrol sector. Have dispatch log this as a civil matter. No further action required." Simmons snapped another crisp salute. "Yes, Director. Have a good evening, sir." He executed an about-face, walked back to his SUV, and climbed in. A moment later, the heavy engine rumbled, and the cruiser pulled away from the curb, disappearing down the street. The three of us were left in the driveway. The silence crashed back down, heavier than before. "Gary," I said, breaking the quiet. "Yes, sir," he answered instantly. "I don't care about your promotion board. I don't care about your career. I am not going to file a formal complaint because doing so would require me to spend more time thinking about you, and I have actual problems to solve tomorrow morning." I pointed a grease-stained finger at Brenda. "But if she ever steps foot on my property again, if she ever leaves another piece of neon paper on my door, if she ever so much as looks at my trash cans, I will have your base access revoked for abuse of authority, and I will personally call your garrison commander to explain why his deputy of logistics can no longer drive through the front gates. Do we have an understanding?" Gary nodded frantically. "Yes, sir, crystal clear. It will never happen again." "Good," I said. I turned around and walked back to my Bronco. "Now get off my driveway." I didn't watch them leave. I picked up my wrench, slid back under the front bumper of the Ford, and went back to work. I could hear the rapid, frantic squeak of Brenda's tennis shoes retreating down the asphalt, followed by the heavier, defeated footsteps of her husband. I found the loose bolt on the alternator bracket. I tightened it down. The metal was cold and solid in my hands. It was real. It made sense. You would think that would be the end of it. In a rational world, a person humbled so thoroughly would retreat, lick their wounds, and learn to look the other way. But neighborhood dictators do not operate on rationality. They operate on ego. And Brenda Wallace's ego had just sustained a catastrophic fracture in front of her husband and a sworn police officer. 2 weeks passed, no pink slips, no yellow warnings. My grass grew to 3 inches. Nobody measured it. The Bronco remained parked behind the F-150. Nobody complained. The silence was absolute. Then, the monthly HOA newsletter arrived in my mailbox. I usually threw them directly into the recycling bin, but this one caught my eye. Tucked on the second page, under the agenda for the upcoming Thursday night board meeting, was a specific line item. Resolution 4A, amending the community charter to permanently ban the outdoor storage, parking, or maintenance of any vehicle older than 15 years within the Pelican Bay subdivision. I read it twice. It was a targeted strike, a sniper round dressed up in bureaucratic legalese. She couldn't beat me with the police, so she was going to change the laws of the neighborhood to make my hobby illegal. If the board passed it, my Bronco would be in violation of the core charter, giving them the legal authority to hire a private tow company to remove it. She was doubling down. Thursday night arrived with a cold autumn rain. The Pelican Bay Community Center smelled like stale floor wax and old coffee. It was a sterile, brightly lit room filled with folding chairs and a long plastic folding table at the front. When I walked through the double doors at 6:55 p.m., the room was mostly empty. About 10 residents were scattered in the chairs, mostly older folks who used the meetings as a social club. At the front table sat the 5 members of the HOA board. Brenda was in the center seat, the undisputed monarch of the folding table. She was arranging a stack of papers, speaking quietly to the treasurer, a nervous-looking man in a sweater vest. When the heavy wooden door clicked shut behind me, she looked up. Our eyes met across the room. Her hands stopped moving. The color instantly drained from her cheeks, only to be replaced a second later by a dark, mottled flush of pure defiance. She sat up straighter, adjusting her microphone. She wasn't in my driveway anymore. She was on her turf. I didn't sit in the back. I walked straight down the center aisle and took a seat in the very front row, directly facing her. I unzipped my jacket, crossed my arms, and leaned back. At exactly 7:00 p.m., Brenda tapped her pen against the microphone. "I call this meeting of the Pelican Bay Homeowners Association to order," she announced. Her voice shook slightly on the first few words, but she caught it, forcing the shrill confidence back into her tone. They ran through the mundane business first: budget approvals for the community pool, quotes for new mulch at the entrance gate, a lengthy, excruciating debate over whether holiday decorations could be displayed before Thanksgiving. I sat motionless, watching her. Every time she looked out at the audience, her eyes would skip over me, desperately trying to avoid contact. Finally, at 7:45, she cleared her throat. "Moving on to new business," Brenda said, shuffling her papers. "We have Resolution 4A, an amendment to restrict the parking of vintage, antique, or older vehicles in driveways. Several residents have expressed deep concern about property values being negatively impacted by salvage projects and eyesores." She didn't look at me, but the rest of the board did. The treasurer adjusted his glasses and stared at his notepad. "I've drafted the amendment," Brenda continued, finding her rhythm. "It brings us in line with other premium communities in the county. We need a motion to put it to a board vote." "Before you vote," I said. I didn't yell. I didn't use a microphone. I just spoke in my normal conversational voice. In a room accustomed to polite murmurs, it sounded like a gunshot. "Public comment is held at the end of the meeting, Mr. Becker," Brenda snapped, her grip white-knuckling her pen. "I'm not making a public comment, Brenda," I said, standing up. I walked the 3 steps to the front of the table. "I'm offering legal counsel." "You are not a lawyer," she shot back. "No, I'm not, but my office employs 12 of the best federal prosecutors in the district," I said, resting my hands on the edge of her plastic table. I leaned in just a fraction. "And I asked one of them to review your community charter this morning." I pulled a single, folded sheet of paper from my jacket pocket and dropped it on top of her meticulously organized agenda. "Your charter, which you incorporated under state law, requires a 2/3 majority vote of all registered homeowners, not the board, but the entire neighborhood, to amend parking bylaws, I explained, my voice carrying easily to the back of the silent room. Furthermore, the state passed a Right to Repair Act 3 years ago that specifically protects a homeowner's right to maintain personal vehicles on private property, superseding local HOA covenants. Brenda stared at the paper as if it were radioactive. "If you hold this vote tonight, Brenda, it is legally void," I said. "If you try to tow my truck based on a voided vote, it is grand theft auto. I will not call the military police. I will call the county sheriff, and I will have you arrested for felony vehicle theft. And I will tie this board up in so much civil litigation that you will be selling this community center to pay your legal fees." The treasurer physically pushed his chair back from the table, putting distance between himself and Brenda. The other board members looked at each other in sheer panic. "You can't come in here and threaten us," Brenda whispered, her facade completely shattering. "It's not a threat, it's a logistical fact," I said. I looked down at her. All the anger I had felt over the past month vanished, replaced by pity. She was a small person, fighting a microscopic war for control, because the rest of her life felt chaotic and meaningless. "Look around, Brenda," I said softly, gesturing to the empty chairs in the room. "Nobody cares about the mulch. Nobody cares about the trash cans. People just want to go to work, come home, and live their lives in peace. You are fighting a war against your own neighbors, and you are entirely alone." I tapped my finger on the legal brief I had dropped on her desk. "Drop the resolution," I said. "Go home to your husband. Find a hobby that doesn't involve making other people miserable. Because if you keep pushing, you are going to find out what happens when you pick a fight with someone who actually knows how to finish it." I turned my back on the board table. I didn't wait to see if they voted. I walked down the center aisle, pushed through the double doors, and stepped out into the cold rain. I took a deep breath. The air smelled like wet asphalt and dead leaves. It was messy. It was real. I got in my truck and drove home, knowing exactly what I was going to do when I got there. I was going to finish rebuilding that carburetor. The collapse of a dictatorship is rarely a sudden explosion. It usually happens the exact same way a tire goes flat. A slow, agonizing leak that leaves the driver stranded on the side of the road, wondering where it all went wrong. The morning after the board meeting, an email went out to the entire Pelican Bay resident list. It wasn't sent by Brenda. It was sent by Greg, the nervous treasurer in the sweater vest. The subject line was remarkably brief. Resolution 4A withdrawn. Board restructuring. The body of the email stated that the parking amendment had been permanently tabled, pending legal review, and that Brenda had voluntarily stepped down from her position as block captain to focus on personal matters. I read the email on my phone while standing in line for black coffee at the base commissary. I didn't smile. I just locked my screen and put the phone back in my pocket. By the time I got home that evening, the neighborhood had already started to shift. It was subtle at first. A garbage can left on the curb past 5 o'clock at the house on the corner. A garden hose coiled somewhat haphazardly on a front lawn instead of being hidden behind a decorative bush. 3 days later, a teenager 2 doors down left a portable basketball hoop at the edge of his driveway. Brenda would have normally drafted a fine for that hoop within 48 hours. She would have taped a neon pink violation notice to the backboard. The pink slip never came. The hoop stayed. Power in a homeowners association is an illusion. It only exists as long as people collectively agree to be afraid of it. The moment someone stands up and proves the emperor has no clothes, or, in this case, no legal authority to tow a 1978 Ford, the spell breaks. The residents of Pelican Bay didn't suddenly turn the subdivision into a chaotic wasteland. They were still military families. They still valued neatness, but the suffocating sterile fear was gone. They started living in their houses instead of just curating them. I saw Gary the following Saturday. I was in the driveway covered in grease, wrestling with a stubborn exhaust manifold. The weather had turned fully into winter, the air biting and crisp. I was wearing a thick canvas jacket, my breath pluming in the cold air. Gary was walking down the sidewalk. He didn't have his dog. He didn't have his wife. He was just walking, hands shoved deep into the pockets of a heavy fleece jacket. He stopped at the edge of my driveway. I pulled myself out from under the chassis and sat up, grabbing a shop towel to wipe the grime off my knuckles. I waited for him to speak. "Becker," he said. His voice was quieter than I remembered. The frantic, terrified energy from the night the police showed up was gone. He just looked worn out. Carrie. He looked at the Bronco. He looked at the tools scattered across the concrete. She resigned from the board completely this morning, he said. He didn't look at me when he said it. He stared at the rusted front bumper of my truck. Greg took over as acting president. They're dialing back the covenant enforcements, focusing on just keeping the common areas clean. Probably for the best, I said. It is, Gary nodded slowly. She tied a lot of her self-worth to this neighborhood. I deployed a lot when the kids were young, 3 tours in Iraq, 2 in Afghanistan. She stayed back, she ran the household. She kept everything perfect because it was the only thing she could control while I was getting shot at. I stopped wiping my hands. I looked at him. This was the tragedy of it all. Brenda wasn't a monster. She was just a casualty of a different kind of war. The military asks everything of its service members, but it asks entirely too much of the spouses left behind. They spend decades building armor out of perfectionism just to survive the anxiety of the wait. When the deployments stop, when the husband comes home and takes a desk job in logistics, they don't know how to take the armor off, so they turn that rigid, hyper-vigilant control outward. They aim it at the grass, they aim it at the trash cans, they aim it at the guy restoring a truck in his driveway. I know how it goes, Gary, I said softly. And I did. I had seen 100 marriages break under the weight of that exact dynamic. I told her she needs to talk to someone, a professional, Gary said. He finally met my eyes. I think she's going to. She hasn't left the house much this week, but it's a start. Tell her I don't hold a grudge, I said. It was the truth. The anger had evaporated the moment she folded at that meeting. I appreciate that, Gary said. He offered a tight, brief smile, gave me a short nod, and continued his walk down the sidewalk. I watched him go, a mid-level officer in a fleece jacket, just trying to figure out how to navigate the peace. I slid back under the truck and put my wrench to the metal. It took me another 4 months to finish the Bronco. Winter gave way to a wet, hesitant spring. The days grew longer. The grass in Pelican Bay began to grow again. The landscaping crews returned, but the manic intensity was gone. The neighborhood felt lighter. Kids drew on the sidewalks with chalk. A family down the street built a fire pit in their backyard, and on Friday nights, you could smell burning hickory drifting over the pristine rooftops. I spent my evenings and weekends entirely consumed by the machine. I rebuilt the carburetor. I flushed the fuel lines. I replaced the rusted exhaust with heavy-gauge steel. I rewired the ignition system, tracking down electrical shorts with a multimeter until my eyes burned. It was tedious, frustrating, and incredibly satisfying work. Every skinned knuckle and stained shirt was a testament to something tangible. You can't talk an engine into running. You can't intimidate it. You just have to do the work. It was a late Tuesday afternoon in April when I finally put the key in the ignition. The sun was warm, casting long golden beams through the budding trees. I had taken the afternoon off from the base. The security protocols were running smoothly. The precinct was quiet. I had earned 4 hours of daylight. I sat in the driver's seat of the Bronco. The interior smelled like old vinyl, dust, and gasoline. It was the best smell in the world. I pumped the gas pedal twice to prime the carburetor, pushed the clutch to the floor, and turned the key. The starter whined, a high metallic grinding sound. It choked, sputtered, and died. I took a breath. I didn't get angry. I pumped the pedal one more time and turned the key again. The engine caught. It didn't just start, it roared. The heavy V8 engine detonated to life with a deep, guttural rumble that shook the entire frame of the truck. The new exhaust magnified the sound, a throaty, aggressive idle that echoed off the neat suburban houses of Oak Leaf Drive. A small cloud of gray exhaust puffed from the tailpipe, then cleared, settling into a steady, rhythmic thrum. I rested my hands on the steering wheel. The vibration traveled up my arms, a physical pulse of success. I put it in gear, released the parking brake, and slowly let out the clutch. The Bronco rolled backward out of the driveway, the heavy tires crunching over the concrete lip of the sidewalk. The same sidewalk Brenda had once measured with a clipboard. I pulled out onto the street and shifted into second gear. I drove through Pelican Bay. The The truck was loud. It was unapologetic. It didn't belong in a neighborhood of leased luxury SUVs and silent electric sedans. But no one came out to wave a clipboard. A guy washing his car in his driveway paused, looked at the rusted blue frame of my truck, and gave me a thumbs up. I turned out of the subdivision and headed west, away from the military base, away from the federal jurisdiction, away from the chain of command. I drove out toward the county line where the suburbs faded into rolling farmland and open two-lane blacktop. I rolled the windows down. The wind rushed into the cab, violently whipping my jacket around. I pushed the accelerator down. The V8 roared louder, eagerly devouring the asphalt. For 22 years, I had lived in a world dictated by authority, regulations, and the constant, suffocating pressure of keeping people alive. I had moved to Pelican Bay looking for peace, but I had made the mistake of thinking peace meant silence. I had thought peace meant isolation. But peace isn't the absence of noise. Peace is the absence of fear. It's the ability to sit in your own driveway covered in dirt and know that nobody can touch you. It's the realization that the petty tyrants of the world only have the power you hand over to them. I drove for 2 hours. I didn't have a destination. I just watched the sun drop low on the horizon, painting the sky in bruised shades of purple and orange. The engine ran perfectly, no hesitation, no knocking, just steady, relentless forward momentum. When I finally turned back and pulled into my driveway, the streetlights of Pelican Bay were buzzing their familiar amber glow. The neighborhood was quiet, but it was a different kind of quiet now. It was the quiet of people resting, not the quiet of people hiding. I parked the Bronco. I didn't pull it behind my F-150. I parked it right in the middle of the driveway, taking up as much space as it needed. I turned off the key. The heavy engine shuddered and went silent. I sat there for a moment, listening to the hot metal ticking as it cooled in the evening air. I stepped out, locked the door, and walked inside my house. For the first time since I unpacked that first box, I felt like I was actually home. If you've ever had to deal with a suburban dictator, you know that sometimes the best defense isn't yelling back. It's just letting them dig their own grave. Power trips only work on people who are afraid to trip the power in return. If this story hit close to home, or if you just love hearing a clipboard warrior get a massive reality check, do me a favor. Hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and share this video with someone dealing with their own neighborhood nightmare. Drop a comment below. What's the wildest HOA rule you've ever seen? See you next time.